Things not worth having, but don't you worry about a thing.
Okay, it's Ask the Experts, and this is our Don't You Worry About a Thing episode, where we are going to finally boil down the what you should do questions that everybody faces in life. I'm Jill Schlesinger.
I'm Jack Otter.
Eric Schoenberg.
Editor-in-Chief, Eric Schoenberg. Yeah. I like to say that because it sort of grants you that sort of higher power,
Thank you,
if
Jill.
you will.
Yeah, thank you, Jill.
Okay. All right. This is Megan, the producer's idea. If it doesn't work, send all complaints to her. Notice how she stands in the corner, not on camera. We must put a camera facing Megan, don't you think?
Well, it's the producer's privilege to
Yeah. You think?
just, be the maestro off camera.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, Megan.
You can have mine. If you'd like it, Megan.
Good. And Roland, who's running the board and our technical expert, so he makes us sound and look good, hopefully.
We have to be nice to Roland.
Always be nicest to the person who's doing the lighting. This week's Ask the Experts is called the Either Or Show. There are a bevy of perplexing money decisions to be made. Let's tackle some of the some common. Let's do that. Okay, so we're going to do some different A or B, one from column A, one from column B, and everyone's going to weigh in, and then we'll figure out. We probably should we'll end up adding more. So if you've got ideas about things that you want added to this list, things that are burning in your mind, keeping you up at night, what should I do? Blank or blank? Give us a shout at Ask the Experts at MoneyWatch.com. I'm looking off camera to find where the producer is. Ask the Experts at MoneyWatch.com. Okay, so let me just say that there are two rules this week here on Ask the Experts. Okay, wait, I won't go into that. Ready for this? We're going to start with housing. It's always big in the news. Everyone loves that little housing conversation. Eric, you are now coming to a critical moment in your life. You are particularly sort of thinking, should I sell the suburban house, move into the city? We just talked about this morning. Here's your question. Do you rent or do you own?
I would say that used to be the question was easily answered. It was own. You could get on the gravy train of housing appreciation and become a home equity millionaire in no time at all. The last few years made that proposition seem a little bit more dubious than it used to be. I think I still come down on the own side, though, for this reason. As was explained by Moshe Malevsky, a mathematician and financial planner who's been around here a few times and been in the pages of MoneyWatch, owning a home is sort of like prepaying your housing costs. What that means is because you pay down your mortgage, by the time you get near retirement, when you want to have your costs under control, theoretically you've paid off your mortgage and that necessary cost is going to be under control. But that is the one reason. I think that often you'll find places, some cities, where the deal on rental is so much lower than the deal on buying a home that rental would hold sway.
Jack Otter, New York resident for life. Does it always hold rent versus buy? Talk about places where it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Rather than places, I might go with demographics. I think that there's this sense in this country still, despite the crash, that home ownership, the American dream, is something that you always have to strive for. It's always a good thing, never a bad thing. And especially for young people in a slightly scary, dynamic economy, if you're 23, 24, even 29, 30 years old, especially if you're single, rent. You might find that actually the best job offer when you're living in Tampa comes to you from Boulder, Colorado. And if you own a depreciated house in Tampa, that's going to be a tough move. If you're renting, skedaddle.
worries.
You're off next month. And so I don't think people need to feel as if they have to rush into that home. Get the rest of your life settled first and then look into this question.
I like that idea also about it's completely dependent on your personal situation. I would go so far as it really doesn't matter about age. It matters about whether you're in transition or not, whether you have enough money to actually afford owning, whether you can manage the rest of your life. And even point out that there are times, as I had many clients, when they were retiring, I said, blow this house out. You need that money. You need the cash. And you can't go to the grocery store with your den, your great room. You can't. So you need your cash flow. So renting sometimes makes a lot of sense. And I would also point out that, again, I'll go geographically. There are a lot of places where the cost of ownership is mongo. So in a place like New York City, where you have to buy, it also means that you have additional fees, whether it's condo fees or co-op fees, and you add it all up, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this makes no sense whatsoever at all. So let's get off this whole you got to own a house. Renting's fine. I love renting. I did. I'm now owning 2 places, but rental is freedom. And you know when people say you're throwing your money out the window? So what? What if for a year that makes the most sense for you because it's the best thing for you to do in that 1 year? In fact, I was talking to somebody who recently landed a job at the parent organization, CBS, and asked me, what do you think? Should I buy or should I rent? I said, how secure are you in your job? And so he sort of smiled wryly. He says, I guess you're telling me to rent. So, your own situation. Eric, if you are going to buy a 15 or a 30-year mortgage?
I think it depends on how fast you want to, well, here's an obvious answer. It depends on how fast you want to pay it off.
You know,
Look,
he's a genius. He's a goddamn
That's why
genius.
You think of it.
That is why he's the EIC. Mm-hmm.
Think of it as a kind of, a mortgage is kind of forced savings. So with a 15-year mortgage where you're paying more, amortizing the cost of the loan, you are paying it off faster. You're forcing yourself to save more and build up that equity and being paid off sooner. With a 30-year mortgage, maybe the only way you can afford the house you want or the house you need, you can end up paying more in interest. You're going to end up being encumbered longer. You know, as a rule, you want the shorter mortgage. You want to be out of debt faster. You want to save more. But sometimes it's just not possible.
Jack Otter.
Well, I will throw in one of my favorite academic studies. I've cited it before.
Oh, vey, with the academic and the mathematicians. Okay.
Apparently, a 30-year mortgage, purely by the numbers, is a better position as long as you take that extra money and put it into a tax-deferred account. And the way they did this was they actually compared the return that you'd get in your, say, 401k if you invested in bonds of around a 10-year duration. And they didn't even look at what you'd get if you invested in stocks.
Because it could be a negative return the last 10 years.
It sure could.
Right. It's riskier.
Right.
It's not an apples-to-apples comparison.
Right.
But let us hope for our jobs and our society that over the next 30 years, stocks give us a better return than bonds will. So presumably you could do a lot better. But of course, that means that you have to have the discipline to actually put that money in that tax-deferred account rather than blowing it on something. And one more issue is, of course, cash flow. Just because you can pay it off in 15 years doesn't mean that 7 years from now you might say, darn, I wish I had that extra cash flow to buy a house in the Hamptons.
And I happen to love a 30-year mortgage because I think it's opportunity. Again, when Jack and I were talking about this when he was doing his refi, I said, you know, what if you want to buy a bigger place in a few years or 5 years or 10 years? And what about, you know, you're going to have education costs and that's going to come up and you really need that cash flow. Some people, they may not have the opportunity today to make that extra payment. By the way, you can always turn a 30-year mortgage into a 15-year mortgage. You can do that at your own will. But I like not being on the hook for the bigger monthly payment because I do think that gives people a lot more freedom and opportunity. Again, we don't think you should spend that extra money on dining out. Although I like to eat out, not a great way but for cash flow purposes, I tend to like it. And I like if you're in a higher tax bracket, obviously a 30-year mortgage is a better tax deduction for you. It's a bigger percentage of interest in the first 10 or 12 years of the loan. So here comes Eric. He's saying no.
Yeah, I would say the one thing you want to ask yourself is if you can only afford the house with a 30-year mortgage, are you buying too big a house?
That's a good question. I think that it's not so much for most people. I think they can afford it. I think they want the flexibility, you know, because today I have 2 incomes. Everything's great. What if one of us were to lose a job? What if? And so I think that people didn't used to ask those questions as much as they should have. But I do think you have more flexibility with a 30. You can always control how you want to amortize that and, I mean, how you want to pay it down. And so I like it. But, you know, I think that the point being that if you really do need discipline and you want to force yourself, and if that's the only way you can save and you don't have a retirement account at work and you're going to put $5,000 into your Roth and that's it, and the only way that you're going to do it is if the mortgage company sucks the money out of your checking account, yeah, okay, I can live with that.
Yep. It's a way to force yourself to save.
Exactly. Okay, let's switch gears. Still staying on the sort of the borrowing. Eric Schoenberg, how many credit cards do you have in your wallet right now?
I have one.
One? Just one?
Yes.
Really?
Just one. And I think that's probably the right number to have. Maybe two. One for your everyday use, probably a rewards card so that you use it all the time and you build up those miles and those reward points. And another low interest card for big purchases that you're not going to pay off right away. But that card should be used sparingly.
Is it true that you have a Victoria's Secret card and that is your only card?
I'm outed, yes.
Okay. All right. Jack, one card, two cards, several cards. What do you think?
I don't mind. I carry two. One is an American Express card. The other is a MasterCard. But I think that really the key question is two or more, and the answer would be no more.
No more. Because it does affect your credit score. The more credit available to you, as long as you don't use it, but it is part of the credit score factor. But I like two because it just, it's easy. You have these people who have 14 credit cards. What are they thinking? It's like a mess. And, who needs a wallet all fat like that anyway? Credit versus debit, Eric.
In contrast to some of the things that have been said on this website, I prefer debit. Now, as you can see from the things I've said already, I like the idea of discipline that keeps you from overspending or getting into debt. A debit card forces you to pay out of your savings rather than run up debt. The temptation just isn't there. You have the convenience of a credit card, but there's no possibility that you'll end up with a balance at the end of the month. So debit, unless you absolutely need to, unless you absolutely don't have the money in your checking account.
Jack?
Yeah, I like that logic. The one thing I would say is, as we've said on MoneyWatch, for certain purchases, you get important protections from a credit card.
Right.
And even little things like if you're handing it to the hotel clerk before you check in, you might want to think about the credit card, because what they'll do is they'll essentially lock up that money in your checking account before you've even spent it. Let's say you want to dispute a charge. It's much better to have that on the credit card. So there are certain charges where you're better off putting in the credit card. For everyday use, the take it straight from the bank debit card argument is pretty strong.
And using or avoiding credit cards or debit cards, I'll just jump in there that, obviously use your credit card for convenience and pay off your bill. And if you can't do that, don't use your credit card. Come on. You guys, we got to whip you into shape. Let's talk about spending. I actually happen to be a very expert in the spending category. I'm the expert. Okay. All right. Too bad Ray isn't here for our next one. But Jack, I'm going to switch to you. New car or used car?
This may be the biggest slam dunk on our list.
Go for it.
As much as everyone loves that new car smell, the fact is, when you drive it off the lot, as soon as you hear that second bump of the tires going off the little curb there,
yeah,
you just lost $3-5 grand. There's nothing like buying used cars regularly instead of new cars for those suburban people who put a lot of miles on them to really rack up the savings. I mean, in a decade, easy 10 grand savings.
Now, Eric is a car buff, right? Eric was telling me that he wanted to get a manual to learn how to fix his car, which I found was quite amazing. You're a mechanic, you're a Renaissance man, you're an actor, a mechanic, and a money guy. Jeez. Do you agree? Buy the used car, even if it's smelly, like someone else's smelly yuckiness?
Oh, no. I think the best strategy is to buy a new car but never drive it off the lot.
So you got to buy a used car? Is that the deal?
Used car. It used to be that there was a reason to buy a new car, and that was the warranty.
Right.
You couldn't get it with used cars, but now warranties are transferable. So you can buy a 1-year-old car that has already had that depreciation, and you still get it repaired for free for another
How about a
12,000
Toyota?
miles.
Should we buy a Toyota, a used Toyota? I'm thinking that might not be a great game plan right now.
I have a feeling that Toyotas might be undervalued right now, and this might be a good time to sneak in and grab a bargain.
I just blogged this because I said I can't wait. In the spring, I'm buying a Toyota. That's my contrarian bet. I cannot wait. It's going to be fantastic.
Absolutely.
And I might buy a new one because I think they might offer incentives for the first time ever in Toyota's history. Okay. Here we go with the spending. This is a very bad question for me and Eric. We've already been outed on this. Ivy League liberal arts school or state school for education? Eric Schoenberg. Would you like to state the case? And Ray is not here, so in his absence, you have to also argue his case. Is there some theme that we could do?
Well, I'm right on the cusp of this, and so I've looked into it, and the data is perfectly ambiguous. But I'm committed to paying for an Ivy League education when my daughter gets into a school like that.
God willing.
Yes, God willing, knock on Formica. But the data actually suggests that when all is weighed in, that it might be worth the money. That in spite of some studies to the contrary, the contacts you make, the education, the credentialing, it may pay off in the long run. Anyway, that's what I'm betting on.
Okay. Now, in Ray Martin's absence, Jack Otter, can you give us a state school perspective and just pretend to be Ray for a second? Just channel him.
Well, I'll say personally, my wife went to Penn State, and
Biggest party school of the year, by the way, right now.
yes, which is very amusing to her and her friends. My wife is editor-in-chief of the daily newspaper, so I think she parties more as a working mother of two.
There you
which
go.
is to say never than she probably did in college, or at least husbands want to believe that, of course. So she's doing great, and I think, and as we know, plenty of state school people have done brilliantly. I think actually this decision is much harder to boil down to dollars and cents than all the other ones we're talking about. I think it's very emotional. It depends a lot on the personalities involved. Certain people make great use of contacts. They're really good at networking. And so having that Ivy League education will pay off in spades. For other people, I mean, I don't know, an engineer, say, who likes to sit and be brilliant alone, I don't think it makes any difference, and the resources of an enormous state university might actually be a heck of a lot better than what you get at Princeton.
Plus, again, the football games are much better. The tailgating is much better. And the partying that goes on at some of those state schools is...
I actually like Ivy League football because put 10 pounds on me, and I could be a wide receiver there.
There you go.
Whereas, you go to Ohio State and forget about it.
You have
It's
to
a
be
different...
a pro. That's right. Or you could always make the lacrosse team. Actually, lacrosse is probably more competitive than football.
Right. No, you got to be a
schools.
fencer. Fencing. Believe me, that's the place to be. Okay, investing and saving in the last few minutes. Eric, bonds, individual bonds or bond funds?
I prefer bond funds. With bonds, buying them is kind of a black box. You really are dependent on a not very liquid market and the kindness of your broker, which is, you don't want to be in that situation. Plus, you have the reinvestment problem. When your payment comes every 6 months in a coupon, and it's measured in the hundreds of dollars, it's hard to put that back to work. It's easy to do that in a bond fund. The income comes monthly. You can buy partial shares. It's a lot easier.
Right. If you've got massive amounts of money, then you can go out and build a beautiful bond portfolio of individual bonds. But I think for most people, a bond fund makes a lot of sense. Yes. Jack, individual stocks or stock mutual funds?
Oh, I'm a big trader on the stocks.
I know
Buy
it.
them quick,
Woohoo!
move them quick. That's our MoneyWatch.
Churn and burn.
Cover that man's mouth.
That's it.
I think clearly mutual funds are the way to go. Study after study has shown that we simply can't beat the market, or the vast majority of us can't. And as we say all the time on MoneyWatch, if you want a guaranteed built-in advantage, go with an index fund over an actively managed fund. Forget for a moment the fact that most active managers can't beat the market. They have to actually beat the market not by a little bit, but by 1.5 percentage points or so per year regularly to even keep up with an index fund, because they're charging for their brilliance, which unfortunately isn't quite enough to beat the market.
Plus all these new ETFs that you can trade for free at Fidelity and Schwab. It's opening up the market. I cannot wait till we actually have, this is going to be interesting, whether they'll ever allow ETFs to pop into the most retirement plans. It's starting a little bit. We'll see if that starts to happen, because a lot of companies are now playing with that idea. So it's cheap to invest. You don't have to be a genius. Just reallocate every 3-6 months. All right, come on.
And normally you can do that automatically.
Yeah, make it easy. Okay, here's this question. I used to get this. This was one of my literally top 10 questions as a financial advisor. Collect Social Security as soon as you're eligible or delay? Eric?
The answer is delay. Delay as long as you can, unless you're not very healthy and you really need the money. But if you can, delay. Putting off taking your Social Security is like getting an 8% return, and with no risk. Can't get
Who's
that in
getting
the
that?
market
I was
right
gonna
now.
say, who's getting that? And also, if you're married and you have a non-working spouse, it's terrible to take it early. It's one of the worst possible decisions you can make, because if you were the working spouse and your non-working spouse is sort of hooked to your formula and you kick off, your non-working spouse has a lower amount for the rest of her or his life. So that's bad.
And we should let viewers know we're going to post a story on the subject with more details of that math that Eric was just talking about next week.
Next week. Yes, phew. Okay. I didn't know when this was getting. Okay, ready. Last one. Banks versus credit unions. Credit unions used to be like, you had to work for a company. It's, the blankety blank credit union or a municipality or a union. Now we got credit unions open up to lots of people. Eric, credit union or bank?
Credit union.
Credit
Best deal
union.
in banking.
What about the lack of ATMs?
Well, some credit unions will let you use ATMs around and reimburse you for the charges.
And what about you, Jackson?
I don't get as excited about this difference, to be perfectly honest with you. I think you do things like manage your housing costs correctly, you buy used cars instead of new, and so forth. To me, a bank is kind of a utility. I pay nothing for checking. Because I'm a pain in the butt, I bug them for what their highest yielding accounts are for savings.
Jack, wait a minute. You are a pain in the butt?
I pester them.
Shocking.
I pester them about getting me in the best savings account.
Very
And
good.
so I'm happy with my great big enormous Citibank account. But Eric's right. You can get a slightly better deal at credit unions. For me, it's just not worth the hassle.
Now,
Well, one of the things that really appeals to me about credit unions is the relative absence of gotcha capitalism. With my bank, I feel like they are lurking around the corner, waiting for me to run over some unidentified limit or cross some undisclosed border so they can hit me with a fee.
And a good example of that is how they mess around with the interest rates on savings accounts.
Right.
I'll constantly find out, the savings account I'm in was the best yielding one last week, but not anymore. And a credit union, I don't think, would pull that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, will have to point out that after living in Rhode Island for a decade, that when the entire credit unions, every single credit union in the state of Rhode Island got shut down because of a crisis, doesn't mean that bad things can't happen to a credit union, but they've been much more successful in this downturn. I think 25 credit unions closed last year versus 140 banks, so there's a good sign there. They are owned by their members, so that's another good sign. And they don't have tons of product to push. My other pet peeve about a bank, you go in to get a money order or something, and then all of a sudden you have to talk to some ding-dong who's like the quote-unquote investment specialist. No thanks. All set with that. I use MoneyWatch. Okay, guys. This has been our very first edition of, what are we calling this again? What are we calling it, Megan?
The Gilligan's Island show?
The either or.
Oh, okay.
Or the Don't You Worry About a Thing. If you've got more suggestions and questions you have, go to send us an email, asktheexperts@moneywatch.com. It's been great to have you here. Thank you so much. I'm Jill Schlesinger.
I'm Jack Otter.
I'm Eric Schoenberg.
He's the editor-in-chief. Tune in next time. Thanks for watching.
Don't you worry about a thing.